So I'm Tyler Williams. I'm the one of the pastors here at Greenfield, as well as a former professor for like over 20 years at Taylor and at King's. And so when Randal suggested this event and this topic, I thought it sounded good. I've taught world religions and things like that as well. So this evening we're going to be witness to a conversation about some of the big questions in life from both a Christian and a Muslim perspective. The conversation will include things such as each faith's understanding of God, the human problem, as well as how they may engage different challenges of contemporary culture. I would say that the goal of this evening is for us to leave here with a better understanding of our own faith tradition, as well as a better and perhaps more gracious understanding of the faith of others, beyond the all too common caricatures that we see in the news and social media. The specific plan for this evening is to go about 90 minutes, starting with a brief introduction by each participant, about a 40-minute conversation, and then leaving about the same amount of time for questions and interaction. And then we will finish the evening with a reception in the foyer. So with this in mind, let's meet our conversation partners. So Christa Eisbrenner holds a Master of Arts degree in Muslim Studies from Columbia International University and teaches Understanding Islam at Taylor Seminary here in Edmonton. And she was also one of my students way back when. So anything she says that's not right or bad, she can blame on me, and everything else you can attribute to your other professors. She studied Arabic and French while working among Arabs in the Middle East and Europe before returning to Canada in 2013. Christa is currently the National Director of Women for the Baptist General Conference of Canada. Hassan Masoud received his PhD in philosophy from the University of Alberta in 2015 with a background in science, Arabic language, and Islamic studies. He is teaching courses in philosophy and religion at the University of Alberta, at St. Joseph's College, and Concordia University of Edmonton. He studies Islamic philosophy and mysticism and interpretations of the Quran in both Arabic and Persian. And finally, our moderator for this evening is Randal Rauser. He is a member of Greenfield Community Church, and so is well known to all of us. And he is professor of theology at Taylor Seminary. And so, why don't we welcome them with we'll clap for them now. We'll start this evening, and I'll ask the first question, and then I'll turn it over to Randal. But let's begin by learning maybe a little bit more about each of our speakers. So if you'd like to share a little bit more about your background, please do. Christa, you go first.
So I'm from the Edmonton area. I grew up on a farm south of Edmonton here. I have known and loved Jesus as long as I can remember. Grew up in a home that was taught, and so I continued learning about God and Jesus and what that faith means to me from a young age. Brings us here. I have lived in 6 countries on 4 continents, and that has definitely shaped the way I view others and see God.
I was born and raised in Iran, and I have a bachelor's in science, a master's in logic, and a PhD in philosophy, so diverse fields. When I was in my high school and when I was an undergraduate student, in my spare time, I used to go to some seminaries to learn Arabic. And you know, in Iran, people speak Persian, not Arabic. Some people think that Iran is part of the Arab world. And Arabic is quite different from Persian. And I learned Arabic, and I used it as a very powerful tool for Islamic studies, and since then, for about 30 years, I studied Islamic philosophy and mysticism, and I'm almost self-taught in Islamic philosophy and mysticism. My research in my PhD was on epistemology and logic, not relevant to Islamic studies. And I taught some courses on Quranic studies, on the comparative study of the Quran and the Bible at the UOA, so I'm completely interested in this sort of conversation and dialogue.
One thing I'll just say is the subtitle to one of my books is Dialogue in a World of Loud Voices and Hardened Opinions. And I think that that's what we're aiming for here tonight, that sometimes there's a lot of loud voices, there's a lot of hardened opinions. And one thing that we all value up here is conversation among other people. We're not afraid of a little bit of disagreement. In fact, I like to point out that the origin of the word argue is to shine forth. That's what the etymological origin of the word is. And what I hope that we can have tonight as we have conversation across different worldviews, realize some of the shared perspectives and some differences, that through all of that, something will shine forth. So we're just going to get started. Maybe talk about an elevator pitch. What I'm thinking here is, for each one of you, I would ask you, would you just summarize to get us started your belief, Christianity, Islam, in 30 seconds? How would you describe Christianity or Islam in 30 seconds?
Whew, okay. God created the world, and he created it good. And he created humanity. And humanity was created in the image of God. But humanity decided to try and live with wisdom apart from God, which broke the relationship between them. And the rest of humanity, the history of humanity, has been broken relationship and dealing with this separation from God. But God is good, and he has never given up on humanity. And so God came to us, the person of Jesus Christ, to redeem that broken relationship that humanity had lost. And he sacrificed to do what we couldn't. He repaired what we couldn't repair, so we can once again be in restored relationship with God.
Hassan?
Okay, in my case, I can say that actually, because Islam is an Abrahamic religion, just coming after Christianity and Judaism. So mainly the points that Christa made are in our set of beliefs. But to add to that, Islam literally means submission to God, and many interpreters of the Quran, many Islamic scholars think that whenever in the Quran we have the term Islam, in our translations we have to translate it as the submission to God, or as they say, Islam with lowercase I, not the uppercase I. And actually Islam in uppercase I is a historical contingent religion that came after that. So the only, the basic and the fundamental concept is submission to God, and have every element of life and every corner of life just for God, towards God, and submit yourself, your properties, intellectual properties, your knowledge, your wealth, your health, everything, just submit to God. This is the meaning of Islam. And in the actually process, we have to have prophets, we have to have angels, we have to have the concept of afterlife, but everything is arranged around the concept of submission to God.
Thank you. So these, of course, are the two largest religions in the world. There are approximately 2.2 billion Christians in the world and approximately 1.5 billion Muslims. So not surprisingly, there's a lot of diversity in these two religions. We can only scratch the surface on that. But I was wondering, in order to get a little bit of a map of the land, if you could say something, Christa, about the diversity of Christianity, how you'd understand that, I don't know, Protestant, Catholic or something, and likewise for you, Hassan, maybe Shia, Sunni, and some of those distinctions.
So for the first 400 years of Christianity, it was not a legal religion. There was huge persecution, and at this point, there were no church buildings yet. The church was the people. And then with he legalized Christianity as the state religion. And then it flourished, it spread, and that's when all of these councils happened. And there were the Eastern Church and the Western Church had differences. They had some councils together, they had some councils differently. This is where we have the Eastern Orthodox Church now and the start of the Catholic Church. In the 1500s, there were some people that said, there's corruption within the church, we need to reform. And this is when the Reformation happened. Obviously, I'm talking big generalizations here. And this is when the Catholic-Protestant divide happened, was in the 1500s. And then to go more recently, at the beginning of the 1900s, there was some real liberalism that was happening within Christianity, and people looking at it going, is that an actual historical event? Is this all mythical? What is it? And so some people said, no, we need to come back to the fundamentals. We can't allow this liberalism to come in. And so this fundamental movement happened as well within Protestantism. So we have more of these mainline Christian churches, and then we have the evangelical churches, and then there are many divisions and different patterns of thought within those.
It's hard to explain just in a couple of minutes what divisions we have in Islam, but the story is different from Christianity, and it's good because the majority of the audience are Christians. So to explain in that framework, so in Christianity, the divisions are mainly doctrinal, and we have some different beliefs about Jesus, about the Bible, about the church. In Islam, in fact, this did not happen, and the main beliefs of Islam are the same throughout all the sects and denominations. The division between Sunnis and Shiis happened actually right after the death of Prophet Muhammad in 7th century, and it was based on a disagreement about the person or the category of people who could be successors of the Prophet. And it was not about the concept of God, the concept of Prophet, the Quran. Everything is exactly the same for all Muslims. And therefore, for some people, there are different approaches that how we could explain this division. For many scholars, the division is just political, just based on the idea of succeeding Prophet Muhammad. For Sunnis, who are actually make the majority of Muslims today, that if I'm gonna correct the number that Randal said, we have, based on the last statistics on 2009, I think we have 1.8 billion Muslims. 1.5 of them are Sunnis, and 300 millions are Shiites. Mainly Shiites are in Iran, Iraq, and Lebanon, and Sunnis are all over the world. And the difference is just that I said, between the imams that Shiites have and the caliphates that Sunnis have. But on Sharia, that if you have time, we'll talk about what Sharia means, and about the interpretation of the Quran, and about other beliefs. They don't have disagreements. And almost no war or struggle happened between these throughout the world. But based on some political problems or political debates, we have some problems today.
Okay, we're going to now segue to talk about God. Big topic. And I want to begin by setting up this question. To go back to December 2015, at that time, there's a well-known Christian university in the United States called Wheaton College. And there's a professor named Larisha Hawkins. And at the time, she posted something online. She wrote, "As Pope Francis stated last week, we, that is Christians and Muslims, worship the same God." And that statement created something of a firestorm of controversy 3-some years ago. And actually, she ended up losing her job at Wheaton College. But the statement, I want to use that statement as a launching point for conversation. But rather than focus on the word worship, I want to take a more general and modest question. When Christians and Muslims refer to God or Allah, are they referring to the same being? Some people say, no, they're not even referring to the same being. So I wanted to hear what your position on that is. And one reason is because if you were to say, no, we're not even referring to the same being, then anything else we're going to say about the nature of God is talking past one another, right? Because we're talking about different beings. So it's a good question to launch us into a conversation on God's nature. So who would like to jump in? Are we referring to the same being when we refer to God, Christians and Muslims?
For sure, we refer to the same God, and even if I'm gonna just give a textual reference, in the Quran we have the term the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as we have in the Hebrew Bible, and for the same reason in the New Testament. So based on the texts and actually the scriptures, we have no doubt that there is only one God, and all people are talking about one God. And also we can support this by some theological, philosophical arguments to show that there could not be more than one necessary being, if you want to talk philosophically. And although people might think about that being differently, might have different understandings, might have different sorts of worship, different sorts of relationship between human and God, but still that being, that necessary being, is one and the same for all people.
In the Bible, in Acts chapter 2, it talks about when the Holy Spirit came. As Christians, we refer to this as the Pentecost. And there were Arabs at the Pentecost. The Arabic word for God has always been Allah. So this is not just a Muslim word. This is the word for the one and only God in Arabic. This is the word in every Bible in Arabic. God is Allah. I think that's really important for us Christians to remember, because if we start denying that, we are denying a 2,000-year heritage of Arabic believers. I have spent a lot of time with Arabs over the last 20 years. I know a number of people who have once believed in Islam and now identify as Christians. And when I have ever posed this question, not once have I ever heard anyone say that they switched gods. That is never the way anyone has ever referred to that. The answer has always been more of a 1 Corinthians 13, I used to see God dimly, but now I see him clearly as face to face. That what I knew before wasn't making sense. And now God is up close and personal, and I know him. The fundamental difference in who is God is what you do with Jesus Christ. But Allah is like our English word for God, and we have one God.
And by the way, this is probably a good moment to say we will be going to questions from the floor somewhere around 7:50 to 8 o'clock, depending on how things go. So if you want to ask a follow-up on anything our speakers say or something else, just make a mental note of that, and we'll open up the floor at a later point. Now, one question maybe we can begin to talk about the divine attributes of God or the nature of God. And one way to talk about that is to ask a question. If there was one word you were to use to describe your understanding of God, what would that word be?
My word would be love. God is love. As a Christian, I believe in the Trinity, that there is relationship within God, and that we were created for a relationship with him and relationship with others.
What do you think about love?
For sure, love is one of the significant concepts in Islamic literature in general, and in the Quran itself. The term in the Quran, which is rahmah, or in some cases that God loves some groups of people, those who pray, for example, or patient people who are loved by God. And in those cases, actually, we have this notion of love between God and people, and between people and God, this two-way relationship. And this notion has also been emphasized and worked on in a very substantial way by Muslim mystics, most significantly by people like Rumi, like Ibn Arabi, and others. And now we have a huge theory of love in Islamic mysticism that actually equates God with love, and what flows from God towards the universe and makes the universe work as it does is just God's grace and God's love, and what just bring people back to God is love. But from my own perspective and from my own understanding of Islam and the Quran, the most significant God's attribute that I can think of is his omnipresence. That in the Quran, God's omnipresence is...
How would you define omnipresence?
Yeah, omnipresence means God is everywhere, and no place, whether in the objective world or in the subjective world, within the psychology or in the minds and the souls of people, you can never find any place that God is absent, something like that. There is a verse in the Quran that both mystics and philosophers love this verse, which basically saying the East and the West belong to God, and wherever you direct or wherever you look, actually you see the face of God. And in this way, I think in Islamic theology and in Islamic understanding of God, God's omnipresence is prior to God's omnipotence and omniscience.
Okay. So what do you think about Islam and the Muslim understanding of God versus the Christian? What do you think is the biggest difference in your perspective, Christa?
I think the biggest difference is the idea of submitting as a servant of God and being adopted as a child of God. I think we relate to God very differently when we view ourselves as a servant or as a child.
Okay. What do you think about that? Now, in a sense, this is getting into the question of the human problem, but these things are linked. So why don't we just go with that for a minute? Hassan, do you think that there's a difference there, that from a Christian perspective, this idea of adoption, of being a child of God, is very, very central to the Christian's understanding of God and how one relates to God? Do you think that that is a difference from the concept of submission in Islam?
In my opinion, that actually there might be some disagreement, but in my case, I always try to downsize and downplay these differences. And as I frequently refer to Rumi, for him, you see sometimes Rumi refers to God as Father. And also some mystics actually, when they want to use terms, not in Persian, because Persian is a gender neutral language, but Arabic is a gender sensitive language. And when you see, for example, when Ibn Arabi is talking about God, they refer to God as a female figure when they want to choose the verbs and the pronouns that refer to God. So there is a variety of things that even we can think about God as mother, not only father. But the inclination in the Quran and in the root of Islam is a sort of pure monotheism, and that division between God and humanity, and God as just a supreme God and humanity as just people who should obey God as servants of God, are one of the fundamentals principles of Islam. So I see that difference, as Christa mentioned, but I think it is not so important that makes difficult the way that we want to have a common approach to solve humans' problems.
Now, as I understand it, Muslims, some would say that Christians are guilty of committing shirk. Is that correct? Can you define that concept and say what that charge would be?
First, let me explain what shirk means. Shirk means associating some deity with God, and actually, never Muslims said that Christians are doing this. So shirk is the concept, and the person who is doing shirk or who has beliefs which can described by shirk, called mushrik. And in the Quran, only those Arab pagans and idol worshippers are called mushrik, never people like Christians and Jews. And there is a verse in the Quran which basically says, if somebody says there are three gods, they are actually doing shirk. They associate gods with God. And never Christians believe in three gods. And as we know, the concept of Trinity or triunity is a tricky concept, and there is always theological explanations for the way that we have to understand these three as one at the same time, three and at the same time one. So for Muslims, Christians are monotheists, and they are believers in the one true God, but they have different interpretations. So for sure, for Muslims, Jesus is a prophet. Never they say Jesus, they say Prophet Jesus, like Prophet Moses, like Prophet Muhammad. And for them, the figure that corresponds to the Holy Spirit is mainly the Archangel Gabriel, who is an angel. And the categories of people and angels and God are just different things. So
now, I'll put it this way, you've interacted over the years with many Muslims. Have you had people say that worship of Jesus is engaging in an idolatrous practice of equating a finite creature with God? Where have the differences come as you've interacted with Muslims over the years?
The differences have come when people have very clearly told me Jesus is a prophet, and he's one of the major prophets. And in Islam, we have to respect all of the prophets. We love all of the prophets, but he is not God. And that's where that line is drawn. But for the Christians out there, Muslims respect the prophet of Jesus. So start there, okay? We have that in common. Start there. It's what do you do with his divinity? And that whole idea of the Trinity is never an easy one to explain. I'm not going to try and give you any little illustration to make sense of it, because that never does it justice. But just the foundational belief is that God is more complex than I can articulate. And God, because of this main characteristic of love, demonstrates that within himself, for us, with us.
I'd like to go to the question of the human problem. And in particular, how do Christianity and Islam each frame the concept of being in right relationship with God, or salvation, or whatever term we might want to use? So maybe start with you, Christa, and then we'll come back to you, Hassan.
So as I've already mentioned, it's a broken relationship. So that's broken in terms of intimacy with him. It's also a legal, we have broken his law, what he has told us to do. And so just that legal separation. And then there's also a consequences to that. And that's more fear-based. There are consequences to breaking that relationship. And so these are the problems, that because we are guilty, because we are afraid of consequences, and because of that broken relationship, that's more an issue of shame. It's being an outsider of your community, that we are outside of a relationship with God. And so how do we get back to restoring that relationship so now we are no longer guilty but in a position of innocence? How do we regain that honor of relationship, and how do we come back into a position of power instead of fear? And that's what Jesus Christ deals with on the cross, is he restores all of those things that have been broken. And so it's not what we do to bring us back into a right relationship with God. It's what Jesus has done, and we either accept it or reject it. But we don't earn our way back to a restored relationship.
Okay, thank you. Hassan.
In Islam, with the leading principle of simplicity, and if you have time, I will explain about this simplicity, which is a real key if you want to understand the Quran. I always say this to my students, that if in the comparison of the Quran and the Bible, you want to understand in some cases that what the Quran treats, for example, some stories of Moses this way, some stories of Jesus this way, the first guess that you can have is that Islam tries to simplify everything. Based on this leading principle, it is good to mention that in Islam, the common sense and the reason and human conscience, so reason to find right beliefs, and just inner moral conscience to find good behavior are the key concepts. And there is a verse in the Quran which says, God ordains good deeds, and God prohibits bad deeds. So this is a very simple thing that you might think that it is like a tautology, that like a trivial thing, that just saying that good is good and bad is bad. as Shakespeare says. So in this sense, and when you ask, okay, when we just Quran scholars try to explain this, that when God says God ordains good behavior, so what does it mean? So this good cannot be just what God ordains, otherwise it is circular. So we have to understand it that God ordains good behavior. That means good behavior as you can understand, as you humanity can understand. And God prohibits bad behavior as you understand that what bad means. And there are plenty of occasions in the Quran when God talks about, for example, worshiping the one true God, not worshiping idols, or not following tyrants, and as it is in the Quran, taghut, those wrong authorities. And always it says you have to have good reasons. And even in several places, in more than 10 places in the Quran, we have this challenge that the Quran, God, and actually Muhammad, who recited the Quran to people, make this challenge that if you have a stronger argument, you give your arguments. So Muhammad was prepared to have argumentation with people. So we can say the fundamentality of human reason and human conscience are in the center in Islam. And based on that, whenever we see corruption, whenever we see different problems in society, and we can talk about nihilism, consumerism, and those secularism, different problems. When you see different problems in human society, you have to attribute those problems to the lack of one of those two key concepts, either lack of reason or lack of moral conscience. And by lack, I don't mean not having that capacity, actually not applying that capacity, not utilizing that capacity.
Could you say something about the 5 pillars? Like, what role do the 5 pillars of Islam play in the role of a person establishing the right relationship with God? And what are they? And
yeah, the 5 pillars are in the Quran. We don't have this number that we have 5 pillars. It is this based on a report from Prophet Muhammad, who said you have to have these 5 things. These are 5 pillars of faith, as it is called. The first is just right beliefs, belief in God, and as they say, attestation of God's unity. The second one is prayer, 5 times a day, every day. The third one is fasting, and which is one month in each year. Muslims do fasting, and the fourth one is almsgiving. Some let's say necessary, and some just for getting close to God, giving alms, because there are different categories of alms. And the last one is the pilgrimage to Mecca. These are 5 pillars of Islam. So includes both faith and rituals. So we don't have that sharp division between beliefs and rituals in Islam. And so each of these parts, good beliefs, good behavior, praying, fasting, each of these actually contribute to the salvation of people, to getting them close to God.
Hey, Christa, I'd like to hear your reaction to what Hassan has said, and how what you've said and what you understand this right relationship, this process of restoration in our relationship with God, how you understand that differs from what you've heard him say? And also note, of course, similarities, but differences as well.
Right. A way that I have thought about it is when I was talking about the church history and the divisions and everything, is that Christianity is very concerned with right orthodoxy, right belief. Islam is far more concerned with orthopraxy, right practice. And both of those leading into your relationship with God. But that separation of, is it mental? Is it more of the daily, the physical, how I live my life? And there should be both in either right belief and right practice, and how that brings you into a relationship with God. Not all of that is salvation. That is just simply bringing you back into a relationship with God. Because I can have the right beliefs, but if I am cruel to everyone around me, then what do those beliefs mean? A relationship with God, having that right practice, that right orthodoxy, should be transforming. Should transform who I am and how I interact with this world, belief and practice. And people should notice that. And so if I claim to do all these things, but I am not bringing a transformed self to the world, then what is my faith?
Now, both of you have interacted with many people from the other faith over the years. What's the one thing, the one most common misunderstanding that you encounter? So for you, the most common misunderstanding of Christianity, and for you, the most common misunderstanding that Christians have of Islam. Would you like to start?
For me, I think some basic facts about Islam, sometimes people are ignorant about them. That, for example, regarding Christianity, that, for example, the name of Jesus is one of the frequent names in the Quran. The name Mary is one of the frequent names in the Quran. The only female name in the Quran is Mary. And the way that these figures are very, very sacred and respected figures in the Quran and in Muslim beliefs, this is one of the most misunderstandings of Christians toward Islam, and also some of the we can say trivial facts about the history of Islam that many Christians and not you, so some people who don't have enough information sometimes have misunderstandings that when this happened, actually, when was the first time that Muhammad came, where the Quran came, and some very basic questions. And it's really surprising that some people don't know these very simple Wikipedia facts.
Christa?
I would say it always comes down to Jesus Christ and who he is, what he has done, what that means in the Trinity, who the Trinity is, who is represented within it, are common misunderstandings.
So we're going to now segue to look at some topics that are one hears about in contemporary culture and the media and so on. And the first one I'd like to talk about is the understanding of Sharia law. And that's, for many people, that's a controversial and often misunderstood topic, and for some, a catalyst of fear. So could you both, whoever wants to jump in first, maybe start with you, Hassan. How do you understand what Sharia is, and versus how people sometimes in Canada understand that concept?
Okay, the first thing that I can say, which actually solves many problems, is just the literal meaning of Sharia. First of all, Sharia law, or sometimes called God's law, are misleading, these terms, because in Islam itself, never it is called Sharia law. It is just a contemporary term. and is mistaken. Sharia literally means the right path to the origin. So for Arabs, if you want the etymology of this term, the way that they found in a desert or in a riverbank, just to go directly to water, because water was a very important thing in Arabia. And when a way is a correct way to find water, they call that path Sharia. Later on, this term occurred in the Quran and in Islam just as the right way, the right path, the correct way to get closer to God. Like when in a desert you have to find water, so this way you can find actually your origin, your God. And when you see books under the title Sharia in classical Islam, you see rules and regulations about praying, about fasting, the rules about your clothing when you want to pray. For example, that your clothing should be clean when you want to pray is one article in Sharia. So it is not law. Law is a different thing. So it is not like the criminal code of Canada or the family law of Canada. It's something totally different. So all the rituals are mentioned in Sharia. And as well, so we have to admit that in Sharia, we have something like the criminal code. We have something like the family law. And in the majority of Muslim countries, their law is something like the secular countries. It is just the justice system in Canada. You can find it in other countries, including Muslim countries. Just in some countries, they have, and they are not majority, they have some of the rules and regulations from Sharia in their law system. So for this reason, it is called Sharia law. But originally, it is not law. And as what we see today by some extremists, we don't want to name them. You see all over the world, they are just very, very little minorities, and based on the majority of Muslim scholars, they are completely mistaken. So if we come to that again, I can explain more.
So like in North America, there's among Christian communities, there is a group called Dominionists. And their goal is to see society built upon Christian principles and the Ten Commandments ensconced into public law. So is there an expression of some Muslims? I mean, I think I heard you saying that there are some Muslims who have a similar view when it comes to Sharia, that they would like to see Sharia in Canadian societies. I mean, how common in your experience are those ideas? Because I think that's what a lot of people are concerned about. There's some people that would like to see all people recognizing it within Western society, Sharia.
Right, so I would say this is not going to the criminal code aspect of things. This is more on how do I conduct family life? How do I conduct society, how we relate to other people? So I think a correlation could be made between when the French and the English were fighting for Canada, and the English won, Battle of Abraham and everything, and then they basically said, we're the ones in charge, we get to overrule here, and they said, okay, but you can still have the church. So the French Catholic Church still ran things. There was still the law, the conduct of how the French communities interacted with each other, which is very different than how Anglo-Saxon rule over them was. They weren't concerned with the criminal code. They wanted to know, can we still relate to each other as has always been our practice? That's not law, as we're thinking about it in the criminal sense, but what is our code of conduct among each other? And so I correlate that with Muslim community in Canada going, we want to be able to conduct our community as is our practice, as is what is our moral obligation to each other. Ben, does that make sense to you? Do you see where?
Yeah, but that was not what I said, that some people want to have.
No,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Yeah, not extremists and fundamentalists.
Let's talk about another term, jihad. So I suspect, well, I'd like to hear, both of your understanding of what jihad is. That's another term that creates a lot of fear among people, and to some degree, I suspect, misunderstanding. But there are also, I assume, there's a diversity among Muslims about the understanding of jihad. So if you could start giving us some perspective, the lay of the land, in terms of how this concept is interpreted and how you understand it as well.
Yeah, this is similarly. There is a problem of using this term today. Jihad in Arabic means simply effort and having a struggle with something. And this term comes from, again, one of the sayings of Prophet Muhammad, in which he says you have two types of jihad, two types of effort and struggle. One, a major one and a minor one. The major one is the struggle you have with yourself, is the way that you have fight your vice desires and you have control your ego. And the minor one is when others attack you and you have to have, for example, a military defense. And again, based on the majority of Islamic jurists, Muslims cannot attack any other society, any other country. The only eligible military action is the action of defense for the vast majority of Muslim scholars. So the idea of a holy war is not at all in any of Islamic texts. And again, what we have today in some parts of the world are the consequences of some political problems. So just to mention one example, you know actually what happened in Afghanistan in 90s. The U.S. started supporting some groups in Afghanistan, like Taliban, just to decrease the influence of Russia there. And the consequence of that, or you can say the byproduct of that, was some extremists there, and Al-Qaeda was actually the child of Taliban. And then after September 11, we had a war against Al-Qaeda and Taliban in Afghanistan and Iraq. And actually this sort of messy and dirty politics make these things happen this way. But the notion of a holy war is not in Islam, and the term jihad still is used in the circle of Muslim mystics and in the circle of just ordinary Muslims as the struggle against your vice desires to get close to God.
Christa?
Yeah, I would agree with that. The word means struggle. The Arabic word for war is harb. It's a completely different root. It's a completely different word. And it has been used for that internal desire struggle. I struggle within myself. I struggle with the pen, to write things down, to declare things. And then there is that external struggle, and it is more of a modern construct to make it into a declaration of war. That has never been the historical meaning of the word. That's a fairly new usage.
Okay, now I'm going to ask one more question, but as I do, if you have a question, now's the time. We are going to begin a segue to questions to the floor. So if you want to come up to either one of these two mics after we ask this question, then we'll go to the floor. And if there are no questions, we will just keep blathering on up here. But if you do have something, then we would invite you to come and share it. And keep it relatively succinct, kind of focused as you present your question. So I'll ask one more question, and then feel free in the interim to come up if you want. So the last question I want to ask for now It relates to this concept of secularism. So secularism, the word secular comes from a Latin root meaning world, so concern with the world. And the ism makes this a philosophy. So to say that in the public square of social interaction, we should remove religion from that public square and allow it to be rigidly secular. And in some respects, Canadian society is getting increasingly secular. There is, for example, proposed legislation in Quebec that would ban from government workers in authority, would ban the display of religious symbolism. And so I'd like to hear a little bit from each of you and your perspective on secularism and what it means to be a Christian or Muslim in contemporary Canadian society.
I think the first thing that it means is to be graceful. If we are living in fear and constantly raging against the way that our rights are being taken away, we will never show the love of God to the world around us, and we have already lost our voice and our say. So that's dependent on us, is to not retaliate in anger and fear. Jesus came to a world where he was not in a position of power. He never said that we need, as his followers, to be in a position of power in order to change the world. And so to be Christ followers, I think we have a great example of how to live in a society that may reject us. We don't have to be in those positions of power. We turn the other cheek when things have happened. Is that always convenient for us? No. Does it feel nice? No. But did Jesus give us an example of how to do it? Yes. When it comes to taking away religious symbols, I lived in France where they have done this. You cannot have religious symbols worn in schools, in work. So if a woman covers, she can't cover and go to her job. That's not allowed. I personally think if that's not inhibiting their job in any way, there's no reason why they can't. Does that mean that they get to be a jerk to people if they're different than them? No, nobody should get to do that. And being in Canada, we are very diverse, so I think a lot of it comes down to respect and choosing to allow differences among us.
Just to piggyback on what you said, to go back to your initial overview of Christianity, you observed for the first, until the early 300s, Christianity was a persecuted minority within a pluralistic Roman Empire, and it's only after the conversion of Constantine that Christianity achieved eventually favored status within the empire, and by the end of the 4th century actually was persecuting non-Christians through the state. So from that perspective, you could say the current position of Christianity within Canada is a return to its roots of being a prophetic minority witness within a pluralistic culture that is often hostile to the Christian perspective.
Yeah, and I don't think that makes God sad. I don't think he is going, you need to be out there fighting to make sure that we're the ones in charge.
Hassan.
Okay, on this actually, I want to add to what Christa mentioned. I agree with everything she said, and it is very ridiculous just to limit people's freedom of behavior, people's freedom of speech, as much as you don't hurt others. So why not? That you can actually have whatever you want, or on your head or your neck or everything. But secularism in general, when it started in the Europe, was a reaction or an attack, you say, or anything like that, a very harsh action against Christianity and the church, and then just got spread all over the world. And what I'm going to say, and as I said, I invite you to study that history. We have to admit that there are some problems on the side of religious people that make others to react that way. People and what happened was just I don't know if I'm using this saying correctly, that people just threw away the baby with water. So what happened was people felt some problems, and just they deleted everything with that problem. Many good things with some bad things that they thought. And even today, when if you have time in the question answer, we'll talk about this. When today we talk about human problems, when people feel lonely, when people have much struggle with the problems of meaninglessness, now we have a rising problem of suicide and addiction and things like that. People need some solutions, and we can say, I think it is fair to say that religions did not give enough solutions to humans' problems. And then many people just got rid of religion in total. And actually it was a very misfortune thing that happened. So now we have much misunderstandings about religious symbols. We have much deep misunderstandings about the function of religion. Religion is not just talking about complex theological things and just make our beliefs, as you said, more and more complex, and then in our behavior we just behave the way we want. And religion is to lead our behavior towards a very good life, a moral life, a spiritual life. And when we see those problems from the side of secularism, we have to try from this side, from religion, from Islam, from Christianity, from Judaism, from Buddhism, Hinduism, every religion we have, towards our moral concepts in our religions, our moral ground, the things that we can give to humanity. And in this way, I think, probably in the long run, we can solve some of the misunderstandings, that the problem is not just this cross here, the problem is not a scarf, the problem is not a turban, the problem is not just some sort of clothing and symbols. The problem is that people nowadays have a very, very deep misunderstanding of religion in general, and Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and other religions in particular.
When I lived in London, England for a couple years, about close to 20 years ago now, and I still remember at Easter one year I was listening to the BBC radio, and they had on a priest to explain what Easter is. And the assumption, the revelation that within England most people don't even know what Easter is about. So that's how secular it has become. But nonetheless, you have a very vibrant Muslim community in England, and you still have a remnant of Anglicans and some charismatic groups and so on. And they do have certain shared interests over against the wider secular society, for sure. So if there are any questions, just come on down to the mic. There's not, unless the people in line are all invisible, then there's not too many. Come on down, Joyce.
I have a couple questions. One is just, you keep talking about mysticism within Islam, and I don't quite understand what that means.
Mysticism, very briefly, at least in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are very, very similar. And it is, the mysticism is a way of life in which your religion, your beliefs, your relationship to God is not part of your life. It is the whole, your life. So for mystics themselves, mysticism is not a particular sect or a branch. It is the real way that everybody should be. So the way that you have to have your relation with God, it is not the case that only in the church you have your worship. In every aspect of your life, you have to keep your relationship with God. And so they have something like, we can say mantras in Islam, it's called dhikr, something that they just repeat with themselves, even at the time they are going to their work or when they are eating their meal. Yeah.
So one of the things that I see in this whole conversation about secularism is just in Christianity, we would say people who are nominal Christians, which means that they just, if they have to choose, they say, well, I'm Christian, not Muslim. Can you just talk a little bit about the quote nominal Muslims or nominal people in terms of faith, and what proportion of that do you see within the Canadian population?
I cannot give statistics, but for sure, the concept of a nominal Muslim is now widespread, and there are Muslims who don't practice, even don't pay attention to any of the beliefs, but still, because they were raised in Muslim families, they call themselves Muslims, and some new contemporary things happened that even people prioritize their being Muslims and Muslim here as a cultural approach to their religion. And I don't know if you have heard of that. A book was written in Canada 2 years ago. The title was something like The Concept of an Atheist Muslim. And the writer, there was a long interview with the person, and the person was not in Edmonton, but I know some of his relatives are in Edmonton, and he argued that there are some elements in Islamic culture that even atheists would like. And I continue using those symbols, those cultures. I want to raise my kids with some values which are Islamic without having any sort of Islamic belief and Islamic ritual. So nowadays we have a diverse way towards having religion, but in short, a short answer to your question, yes, we have nominal Muslims as well. And in Canada, I cannot give a statistics, but maybe 50-50, something like that.
Question over here.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, everyone, guests too.
Assalamu alaikum.
I've been a student of philosophy and worldviews for a long time, and so this is amazing. I have never had Christians and Muslims kind of come together to discuss things. It's very intimidating too, with coworkers or whatever. But for a long time, I've wondered, why is the cross offensive? And I think this goes with postmodernism and our secular shift as well. Like, it kind of bleeds into what you guys were just discussing. For a long time, I just didn't understand why the cross is an offensive symbol. Like, what does it signify? I know what it means as a Christian, but I think it probably means something completely different to a Muslim person. Like, so I think that's maybe my first question. Like, I want to try to simplify. I have lots of questions. I always want to know lots of things. So, yeah, maybe I'll just start with that, throw that out for both Christa and for you, Masoud.
For the symbol of cross, I don't remember anything that Muslims have any bad meaning in it, any insulting content in that. So I don't know what.
Yeah.
But you do, as I understand it, Muslims don't believe that Jesus died on the cross.
Oh, the historical fact, yes. In the Quran, we have a verse which says people mistakenly actually executed another person, but not Jesus, and Jesus raised to God. And The majority of scholars, I say the majority because there are just a very few scholars who think that we can get from the verse, from the composition of the terms, this meaning that actually Jesus was executed on the cross. But the majority of Muslims, based on the ordinary understanding of the Quran, yes, they deny crucifixion, and they think that Jesus is alive and just raised to God.
So Christa, what has your experience been?
So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but part of the call to prayer is come to success. Part of being a Muslim is coming to success. And what we're presenting is a prophet that was killed in shame. Who wants that? That's offensive. And if this is one of God's chosen prophets, and even Muslims will say that he is one of the greatest prophets, was God really going to let his prophet die such a humiliating death? That's offensive.
Yeah, and I think it's even a cultural phenomenon now too. Like that's kind of why this is a growing topic, and I'm interested to hear what the Muslim perspective is. Just with what was my note there? Yeah, it just seems like this socialism and Christianity, atheism, postmodernism. I think just there is no truth and there is no right or wrong. Like I think a lot of that. But yeah, I think my main thing for the longest 20 years or so, it's just the offensive part and why people get so offended over a symbol. But you know how in Plato's Gorgias, the thought of the thing is different from the thing itself. And so I think we sometimes make our thoughts the thing, and I think that is partly where there's a mismatch or a feeling response instead of a thinking response. I don't know how you want to interact with that a little bit, or
So maybe they'll just, if you want to follow up quickly, and then we'll go to the next question.
Yeah, I can come back. I have lots,
Sure.
so I come
And,
later.
well, we're not going anywhere too.
Come
We're going
later,
to
but-
finish officially in
no,
around 12 minutes, but
for sure,
we'll be
if
around.
other people want to come up, I'm glad to
Sure.
cycle through or whatever. So.
Anything else you want to say to follow up?
That was more
Yeah, no, and the fact that you're a philosophy person.
No, is it just a follow-up on the concept of cross, or?
No, just in general with the postmodernism, is everyone's offended now about everything. Like it's hard to have a conversation.
Yeah, that.
So that's kind of what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah,
I don't think it's just
that's,
the symbol of the cross.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's every conversation is kind of fighting that middle ground of the
Yeah.
thing itself versus your thoughts of the thing, and coming to discussing it.
Yeah, I didn't see it as a question. I thought
Yeah,
that
no,
you are just
trying to
giving.
process
Yeah,
it, yeah.
giving your comment. Yes, this is one of the problems of postmodernism. In postmodernism, when they say actually the age of meta-narratives has ended, it is from one respect true, because now in our multicultural society and in a sort of egalitarian societies that we have today, people are equal, people with different backgrounds, with different cultures, with different mindsets, with different beliefs. They interact with each other, and there is no necessity that we have to have one true belief in common between everybody to make our conversation possible. These are good things that we can get from postmodernism, but we can call them extremist postmodernists when they deny everything. There is no value, there is no truth, and there is no way to just evaluate the validity of arguments. And in that way, a good argument and a bad argument are the same. A true belief and a false belief are the same. In this way, actually, postmodernism is going to delete all the questions and all the answers together. So I don't think any reasonable philosopher or any reasonable person can believe in this way.
So we've got another questioner. Jonathan, did you want to follow up? And then Axel afterwards?
So my main question for Hassan is one of the things that I'm most comforted by in my Christian belief is that Jesus made it possible for God to accept me, even though I'm very flawed. I'm very corrupt in various ways, but Christianity has sort of a story about what Jesus, lived a perfect life for us and died for us, and so God can still be just and perfect and yet accept me, who's a long way from that. And I'm wondering if Islam has an answer to the question, how can a perfect God accept me when I'm so imperfect?
In Islam, this question is answered by referring to God's grace, which is that there is a verse in the Quran saying that God's grace fills the world, and in today biological sense, we can say every cell of everything, or every atom actually, or every molecule is filled with God's grace. Therefore, there is no limitation to that. And one point that we can actually talk about in showing this difference is about the original sin that is not in Islam. And based on the Quran, people are born completely clean and pure, and then they commit sins and have mistakes. And in Islamic belief, people have a direct way without any intermediates to God, and even Prophet Muhammad does not have the role that Jesus poses in Christianity. People have their direct relation to God. Even the role of Holy Spirit is not in Islam. You don't need any intercessors, and angels are not intercessors, prophets are not intercessors, and people have a direct access to God's grace, a direct relation to God. Again, there is a verse in the Quran that God listens to what you say directly. Just ask him whatever you want, and he will respond immediately. So this teaching and this tradition actually makes people feel comfortable to have that relation, and so if you ask ordinary people, ordinary Muslim people, they don't think that they need that sort of medium like Jesus. Through him, you have to have your salvation. And there are some other concepts related to this, that, for example, we don't have the concept of assured salvation in Islam. Salvation is a process. So throughout your life and through those things, the pillars like praying and fasting, and that the concept of jihad, the struggle that you have with your inner vice desires, actually you gain salvation throughout your life. Whenever you commit a mistake, then you have to repent. Whenever you lose something, then you have to gain it. In this way, in this interaction with yourself, the world, and God, you have to gain salvation throughout entire your life.
Okay, I'd like to hear, Christa, you respond as well. You've heard what Jonathan said when he posed the question. And Hassan, how would you want to add to that, to what you've heard?
Right. I mean, foundational to Christianity is that we do need that mediator. It is not angels, it is not saints, or at least in the Reform idea in we cannot pray to anyone but to Jesus Christ, as to hear from God, to be in relationship with God. That is through Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ is God. He is the only one that can speak because of who he is. I've lost it.
Just quickly, and then we'll go to our questioner over here. Assurance. So that's like, how do you know you're saved? That's the question.
How do you know you're saved? You know you're saved when you have confessed your condition. When you stop trying to justify yourself and saying, I'm a pretty good person, I've done more good than bad, does not impress God. It is I can't do this without you. And so I'm sorry that I have rebelled against relationship with you. I need you in order to get to heaven. Now, the intimacy of relationship can have one step forward, two steps back, and that's a continual process through our lives. But the assurance of salvation in heaven is not something that moves. The intimacy of relationship moves, but the assurance can stay because that's not our decision, that's God's decision.
Okay, we've got time for 2 more questions, so we'll go over here.
I'm curious a little bit about the relationship between faith and government, or faith and, so certainly for where we are now in North America, we are suspicious of governments based on religion. You know, we sort of shudder a little when we think of Iran, or we think of Taliban running a country, and things like Al-Qaeda and sort of the whole terrorism business. They seem like, well, it seems a little bit like Westboro Baptist, actually, when it comes to extreme views where you sort of shut out morality and focus on your political objectives. And also, when it comes to countries, you think that it's not really right, theologically, to impose God's will, unwilling, by the might of the sword or by the power of the state. Now, that's not always been the case in Christianity, but it seems like it's a very different perspective in Islam, Christianity, or in Reform North American thinking of what God's will is.
This is a tricky topic that we need much time to discuss that.
We've got about a minute.
Yeah.
No
One
pressure.
thing that we can say is, so let me give you just some bullet points. First, the church-state separation is not in Islam, because never in Islam we had a sort of church-state union that we need that separation, first. Second, some intellectuals believe that Islamic society was secular from the beginning, that the rules and the governing system of Islamic societies from the beginning was like the secular societies today, without having religious things in the law. The third, there are very diverse historical facts. For example, in Islam, in the history of Islam, we have a document called the Pact of Omar. You can look it up in internet. The Pact of Omar. Omar was the second caliph after Prophet Muhammad, and at the time of him, actually the spread of Islam towards other countries, other civilizations happened, and the Pact of Omar was a contract between Muslims, and every city that was getting included in Islamic Empire, they had this pact that they have to respect Muslims. If they are Jews or Christians, they have to respect Muslims. Muslims have to respect them. They cannot, for example, have any sort of insult to mosques. Muslims cannot have any sort of insults to synagogues, to churches. And you see a very modern form of multiculturalism, and even we can say secularism. So the issue is very more complex than what we might think. And even today, the last bullet point that I can mention is a very, very huge, numerous diversity in Islamic countries. So you see in Indonesia, people are Muslims, they have Muslim laws in some sense, but they're completely different from people in Pakistan, they're completely different from people in Saudi Arabia, in Iran, in Syria. And this diversity is so much so that you cannot give a simple account of religious government relationship. It's very complex, but it is not as harsh as and as problematic as we here in Canada might think.
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to say this all comes back to the condition of the heart, the condition of humanity. And under Christianity, we believe that all have sinned, all are fallen. And you are going to find that in every culture. And so I used to live in the Sultanate of Oman, which is the kingdom of Oman. And they have a benevolent king that is very well respected. And I used to tell people that I'd rather live under a benevolent dictatorship than a corrupt democracy. And so that happens within Christianity historically and Islam. And these things come and go in circles, in corruption and in good leaders. We see that in Chronicles and Kings and Scripture. This happens because of this human condition. We are fallen, all of us.
Now I'm going to invite Tyler to come up, because, yeah? Okay.
Hi there. Can you hear me? Okay. So I was gonna say, what do you think the future looks like? Like, do you think will humanity be able to ever bridge the gap between science and religion? Because I feel like if God is love or God is truth, I think He would want all the humanity to work together. Do you think we'll ever be able to fix it by actively doing something, or do you think like time will heal itself? Or so yeah, what do you think the future looks like?
That's a great question. Wow.
So you answered.
That's some good thinking on my feet, because I was not prepared for that. Will it fix itself? Man, I wish so. I would love to see that happen. Do I think it will? No. I not on this side of eternity. I think on the other side of eternity, yeah. I think there's going to be some amazing things that we're going to find out that go, oh, okay. But I think in this state of the world, I don't see that happening.
I can say I'm more
I'm not a scientist,
optimistic
so.
than Christa, or let's say less pessimistic than her, that if religions can have a contribution, because based on my understanding of different religions, there are much good contents in different religions that if they contribute, if they try to have a share in improving human condition, then we will have a better world. And I think it will happen. At least we can have a reasonable wish, not just a wishful thinking, that it will happen. When I'm thinking, for example, about Buddhism, I see many good lessons. I'm a person, as a Muslim, always read different scriptures. This is one of my passions. I read Buddhist scriptures, Hindu scriptures, and I read from Bible in our mosque to our fellow Muslims. So I like that. I like these connections. And I see many good points in Judaism. Jews can give the humanity the value of life, the value of family relationship, the family events, the very nice way that they have. Christianity can give the lesson of love to people. Islam can give the lesson of simplicity. I didn't find a chance to talk about simplicity more. The lesson of simplicity and having a more direct relation to God. Buddhists can give the lesson of more focusing to your inner processes and your inner condition using meditation. Hindus can give you a lesson from different people. People cannot have a just one way to God. They have the concept of different paths towards God. So if each religion gives its own share, and if we give up rivalry and these things, as in Edmonton, we don't have anything like that. So Edmonton can be a very good sample that mosques and churches and synagogues, they are not trying to reject each other, to attack each other. They try to make conversations. We have events like this everywhere. And even if we include all, for example, Eastern religions as well, not just Western religions, Eastern religions as well, and not only Buddhists and Hindus, those Japanese religions, Chinese religions, we might have a more bright future by making everybody included, by actually getting different messages that seem different, but all of them are just different paths leading us to the same summit.
Well, so I'll just give some closing words as Tyler comes up to close off the evening. But so Henry Nouwen, a Catholic theologian, has this phrase. He says, listening is the highest form of hospitality. And I think that that's a good message going forward, that one thing we can all start to do is, rather than just to proceed on our assumptions about what another person believes or who they are, get to know them, listen to them, extend the hospitality of a good conversation. And I think that we've done that tonight, so thank you very much. And Tyler.